don't think that the backstory and character of Grimmel the Grizzly make all that much sense when you really think about it. That's pretty much what I want to talk about today, that despite the third film being pretty good in my eyes, and how Grimmel's a really interesting character, at the same time, he doesn't make much sense. Don't get me wrong though, I'm not just some nitpicking hater. How to Train Your Dragon is probably one of my favourite DreamWorks franchises, and a lot of that has to do with the lore and the world building that went into it. The first film's a pretty incredible fantasy adventure story that adapts the world of the books into something fresh and interesting and new. The second film continues to build on that world and fleshes it out even more, with the third delving into more fantastical elements to round out the franchise. There's also the DreamWorks TV shows, which serve to further flesh everything out and bridge the gaps between the movies, specifically the first and second film, which has a fairly sizable time skip, but at the same time I don't think the film series really considers them canon. Personally though, beyond the world building, I've always enjoyed the character work more than anything. I've previously talked about how Hiccup's one of animation's greatest lead characters and protagonists. We've discussed how Hiccup and Astrid are a really strong and compelling ship that gives the story a romantic element and helps to anchor both of their characters. They serve as excellent complementary foils to one another with their own strengths that help even out the team significantly. The side characters, specifically Stoic, are well crafted and have a lot of depth. And then there are the villains. The villains of How to Train Your Dragon are rather varied overall and each bring something fun and exciting to the table that enhances the movies. In the first film, there are two major overarching antagonists that Hiccup has to contend with. There's his father, who's not an explicit villain but simply an antagonist. He's a violent dragon-killing Viking who's rather bitter and stuck in his ways, as his wife supposedly died due to a dragon attack years before. On top of that, his whole village is constantly under siege night after night from the relentless swarm of dragons, and he also has a son that he finds pretty disappointing overall. Thus, he's hard on Hiccup and tries to force him to become something he's not in order to turn him into a proper Viking that he can be proud of. He eventually discovers that rather than being a prodigy dragon hunter, instead Hiccup's befriended them and discovered the source of the trouble with the Red Death, and so off Stoic goes to fight and kill it with his army, only for Hiccup and the new dragon rider swooping in to save them at the last moment. In the end, Hiccup proves himself to be a true heroic Viking, fighting and killing the Red Death alongside Toothless, and making Stoic realise how wrong he'd been about him. On the other side of the coin, the second antagonist is the Red Death, who is simply a large, monstrous dragon that dominates and commands the other dragons and forces them to bring it food as tribute, hence why they're always attacking Berk. It's a reliable source of food for the dragons to steal sheep and fish. Maybe even the occasional Viking arm or leg, I suppose. The Red Death adds a sense of primal fear to proceedings. It's huge and scary and needs little explanation. The second film takes that idea of a single, large dragon being able to control and dominate lesser dragons and then asks this question. What would happen if a human was able to, in turn, control and dominate that larger dragon? What would that look like, and what would it be able to achieve? Enter Drago Bloodfist, who is to me an S-tier villain for the franchise, who is the original anti-Hiccup, or at least, that's how I initially viewed him. Where Hiccup was all finesse and kindness, I viewed Drago as all force and domination, anger and rage wrapped up into one very insidious package. However, the longer things have gone on, the more I've started to think that maybe I was wrong in my original assumption of this guy being the anti-Hiccup. Instead, I kind of view him as a darker version of Stoic. Stoic, much like Drago, is all about brute force and strength, but unlike him, Stoic has compassion and love to underpin these actions. I feel that in many ways, Drago can be viewed as a what-if type of character of how bad Stoic could be if he lacked that morality that shaped his character. A what-if both Valka and Hiccup had been lost to him on that fateful night. After all, is that not the official origin story for Drago? That his village was attacked and his whole family were killed and he lost his arm? Thus, to me, he is evil Stoic. Much like Grimmel is kind of a what-if take on if Hiccup had actually gone through with killing Toothless. I suppose this similarity is likely why Hiccup thinks that he's able to talk Drago down at first, as he knows that eventually he was able to get through to his dad and convince him to change. Meanwhile, Stoic has a greater understanding about what he's actually like and the way that his mind would work. Anyway though, enough glazing the villains. Now this leads us to Grimmel the Grizzly, who, like I said, is among the more cerebral of Hiccup's foes. A dark take on Hiccup who uses his intelligence and his dragon lore expertise to deadly effect to hunt down all of the Nightfuries, leading to their almost complete extinction. Well, I suppose you could argue that he has led them to extinction, as Toothless is supposed to be the last true Nightfury, with his children being hybrid dragon Nightlights, a cross between Nightfuries and Lightfuries. This is held up as the reason that nobody has any lore to share about these dragons, because this guy in his youth came across a sleeping Nightfury and instead of trying to befriend it like Hiccup did, he brutally kills it. The acclaim that he got from his village instilled in him a desire to keep on with his hunting, and so he began his quest to slay the Nightfuries, using his mind to be able to achieve what a normal warrior couldn't. Over the years, this would drive the race to extinction, with Toothless being the last known Nightfury. On the surface of it, that's all well and good. Over the course of the first two movies, whilst we often see the same dragon species crop up in large numbers, especially when they're among the Berkians, the Nightfuries are never amongst them. Whilst at first I think this is simply an aesthetic and narrative choice to make Toothless stand out and make Hiccup seem all the more impressive for his actions in being the only person to actually catch one, they then did pivot into this being an actual story beat. Toothless is known to be a fairly young Night Fury, I'm pretty sure, and he has some pretty hefty feats under his belt. He took out the Red Death with Hiccup, and then in the second film, whilst he is initially dominated by the Alpha Dragon that Drago has under his control, he's able to break free of the command hypnosis and challenges him to fight and protect Hiccup. And he's able to actually win. Already this sets the Night Fury apart as an absolute unit of a dragon that's not easily killed, and so by having Grimmel be the person responsible for the downfall of this entire species single-handedly, it's pretty damn impressive. It also makes Hiccup seem all the more impressive too, because it makes it clear that if he really wanted to be like this, he'd be able to do all the things that Grimmel's done as well. However, at the same time, it makes him seem all the more virtuous and compassionate for being able to find a different way that doesn't involve the wholesale slaughter of an entire species of dragon just because it's the glorious Viking thing to do. In that respect, Grimmel's actually a really well-crafted villain that very much enhances the hidden world and poses a convincing threat within the confines of the film itself. However, that's only when you look at him within the context of that movie and the plot. The film needs a reason to push the dragons into the hidden world forever, and it needs a reason for Hiccup to actually struggle. It needs a push for that separation, and that pushes the idea that people like Grimmel actually exist out there in the world, and that there's a good chance they'll keep coming forever and ever, unless the dragons are hidden away and their memory lost to time. However, Grimmel's story isn't something that I ever really thought much more in depth about though. But when you start to pick at it, and in depth think about Grimmel, does it not all start to come apart at the seams for anybody else and start to seem rather silly? I mean, let's just really think about it, right? This guy managed to kill all the other Night Furies except for Toothless. Every single one. It kind of beggars belief. Having taken a quick glance at his wiki entry, the dude is apparently supposed to be in his mid-50s, and he started his hunt for the Night Furies when he was young. He's also apparently from the continent, so continental Europe as opposed to the islands. He started this quest when he was a teenager, which means he's been hunting them for about 40 years. 40 years of mainly targeting this one specific species of dragon. That's all well and good, I suppose. But when you think about it, is it not a little bit wild that he's managed to actually succeed? I mean, for one, in 300 years of Vikings living on Berk, they managed to accumulate a lot of dragon lore in their book, which they'd use as a guide to hunt and kill dragons. But they never got a single scrap about the Night Fury. Not one bit. It would suggest that they're incredibly hard to capture, and seeing as Toothless has 3 kids after the time skip at the end of the third movie, it would also suggest they're able to breed at a decent rate. I doubt they're going to be one of those species that ends up dwindling in number simply due to their terribly slow and inefficient breeding habits. This would in turn mean that there should be a decent number of them as well. So you're telling me that this guy managed to, in the course of 40 years, single-handedly take out every single Night Fury in the entire world. All of them except for Toothless himself, who apparently only survived because he was chilling with Hiccup. Already we're being asked to suspend some extreme disbelief at this being possible for one guy to accomplish, especially since it seems his major method of taking them down is by fooling them into lowering their guard around a potential mate, and then bam, they're both dead. However, this means that every single one of these Night Furies that he does this to would have to be of the young and single persuasion. So how the hell is he managing to get the older ones? What's going on here? It feels like it stretches believability quite a lot if you ask me. Think of how easily Toothless was able to kill Stoic. He one-shotted the man. Yet this guy was managed to get the drop on what was likely hundreds and hundreds of them. I know he has those special Death Ripper dragons that he has under his control, but it still doesn't make all that much sense to me. Toothless is, unless I'm mistaken, a juvenile Night Fury who also has a disability that means one wrong move in a firefight will cause him to drop out of the sky and become easy pickings for anybody he's fighting. And yet he was still strong enough to survive the landing and the impact of being shot out of the sky by Hiccup. He was able to face down and defeat the Red Death as well as the Alpha that Drago had brought to control all of dragonkind. Toothless is a next-level draconic threat, and he's presumably not the anomaly. I see no reason or proof to suspect that he'd be weirdly strong compared to any other dragon of his species or anything of the sort. So how the hell is Grimmel killing these guys off? Even beyond that though, even if the Night Furies are only found in the Viking archipelago, the existence of the island where the Red Death lives in the first movie, or where Valka's been living undiscovered for 20 or so years, would heavily suggest that there's probably no real proof that Night Furies are even extinct, or that Toothless is the last one. Especially since they eat fish, and so if they live on some random no-name undiscovered or uninhabited island, there's a good chance that they'd simply avoid all notice. After all, if they go out at night and only eat fish, they're going to be hard to see and they're not going to go very far. Plus, the second movie kind of implies that Valka has seen a Night Fury before. She knows about Toothless's special spines. On top of that, I just remember the whole first kill for Grimmel was this dude somehow sneaking up on a sleeping Night Fury. He crept up on a sleeping Night Fury and managed to kill it. I just want to know how it's possible for him to have done this at age 15 with no dragon hunting experience. How did he manage? How did it not smell him or hear him coming? I mean, let's not forget that Toothless was able to hear Hiccup struggling his dragon challenge from a huge distance away, and yet came to save him. Yet Grimmel is able to go so far as to get so close as to kill it without it stirring. Hell, he's seemingly able to kill it so quickly that it doesn't move at all and hurt him or attack him. For reference, if I snuck up on Hippopotamus with a sword, even if I landed a lethal blow, I think there'd be a good chance that I'd still get mauled before it dies. I'm just saying, that's all. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt though, right? Let's assume that he was somehow able to pull all of this off and kill a Nightfury when he was 15, and the local fame and acclaim that he got from his village was enough to set him on the path of speciescide for the Nightfuries, and then eventually to his final goal of wiping out dragons for good. Also, side note, but is it crazy to anybody else just how awful this dude is when you think about it in any real depth? Stoic was a man of his time trying to defend his home from a constant barrage of dragon attacks that he thought cost him his wife, hence why he was on that path of violence. The Red Death is an animal at the end of the day, and even though Drago was a complete crazy pants murderer, at least he had the trauma that led him to be that way. Grimmel just casually decides to wipe out all of the Nightfuries because it makes him look cool. Anyway though, his fame in fortune hunting dragons then begs the question. Why is it that by the time of the first movie, a Nightfury is even a mystery to Burke at all? Would Grimmel not be famous amongst all Vikings? He seemingly killed hundreds to thousands of these legendary beasts, and openly states that he knew Stoic. We see from Stoic's flashback in the second movie that he would meet with other Viking leaders, and we also know that the Burkians were fighting dragons for like 300 years. Grimmel would only be famous with proof, so clearly, I think we can assume that he'd kill the Nightfury, then take its body to a village for some sort of reward where they'd be able to see it, draw a picture of it, learn about it. Somehow though, this never happened ever, and the Burkians stayed in the dark about it the whole time. Are we also seriously saying that he never heard that there was a Nightfury consistently attacking Burke with this big dragon army every single day? That he never thought, ooh, that should be an easy kill? I don't know, I think the idea of his character is a great one, but in the end, in their rush to be able to make evil Hiccup, they made this undercooked backstory that falls apart the moment you try to look at it with any deeper scrutiny. I really liked the third movie, but now Grimmel's fallen to the bottom rung of the villains of the franchise, and it was so easy to avoid. It's such a shame, but in the end, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Grimmel the Grizzly and his backstory? Do you think it works, or can you also see the problems? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.